Title: The Price of Silence. How One Woman Brought Down a Corrupt Cop. Aubrey stepped out of the cafe with her usual poise, the soft ivory dress wrapping gracefully around her slender frame. Her heels clicked lightly against the pavement as she adjusted the strap of her sleek black handbag. She had just caught up with a few close friends after a long day at work, and a faint smile still danced on her lips. But that smile faded the moment two police officers approached her with purpose in their stride. One of them was Detective Nathan Ward, a tall man in his late 40s, with a solid build and cold, piercing blue eyes. The other, Officer Brian Keller, was younger, perhaps in his late 20s. His jaw was tight, and although his demeanor was serious, there was an unmistakable flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. "Good evening, ma'am," Nathan said, his tone mechanical. "We've received reports of a theft nearby. I need to inspect your bag." Aubrey blinked, taken aback. "A theft? I just met some friends here. I haven't done anything wrong." Nathan's eyes narrowed as he glanced over her outfit, pausing at her heels, then slowly traveling back up. "This is standard procedure. You don't have the right to refuse." Annoyance bubbled beneath Aubrey's calm exterior. "I understand you're doing your job, but this is profiling. If needed, I'll come down to the station, but you can't just stop people like this without cause." "You think I need your permission?" Nathan smirked, grabbing her handbag without warning and rummaging through it. "You have no right." Aubrey gasped, trying to pull her bag back. But Nathan's grip was ironclad. Brian shifted uneasily. "Detective, stay quiet," Nathan snapped, shooting him a glare. Brian clenched his jaw and stepped back. Passers-by began to slow, some whispering, some simply staring. Aubrey looked around, her voice rising in frustration. "This is harassment. You all see this, right?" Nathan tossed her handbag back at her. "Nothing in here." "But we're not done." "What do you mean?" Aubrey stepped back. "Stand still," he said. And before she could react, he crouched and began lifting her dress. "No, you can't do this," she shouted, trying to push his hand away. But Nathan yanked it higher, past her knees, as murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. An older woman nearby whispered, "Shameful. But she looks rich. Who knows what she's done?" Aubrey's face burned with humiliation. She slapped Nathan's hand away. "Stop. This is abuse. I'll sue you." He laughed coldly. "Go ahead. Think a complaint's going to change anything?" Brian finally stepped forward. "Nathan, that's enough," he said quietly. Nathan turned to him with a venomous look. "Watch yourself. You want to keep your badge, don't you?" Brian froze and stepped back. Aubrey's body trembled with rage. "You'll pay for this." Nathan shrugged. "I'll be waiting." She walked away, heart pounding, her face burning as if the gazes of the crowd had seared into her skin. She had screamed, resisted, but it had brought her nothing but stares and whispers. Alone, she clutched her handbag like a lifeline. Later, as Nathan and Brian sat in their patrol car, Nathan chuckled. "She'll remember me for the rest of her life." Brian looked away. "You went too far." Nathan snorted. "You want to survive in this job? You learn to use your authority." In her small apartment, Aubrey stood in front of the mirror, wiping away the tears streaking down her cheeks. Her phone trembled in her hand as she called her best friend. "He humiliated me, Jenny," she said, sobbing. "In front of everyone." Jenny's voice roared through the phone. "That's disgusting. You need to report this." "I'll help you. I'm just a citizen. He's a cop. Who's going to believe me?" "I do," Jenny said. "And we'll find others who will." Meanwhile, Nathan was back on the street. A young woman named Ivy stood waiting at a bus stop. Nathan approached with the same icy confidence. "Ma'am, theft in the area. Show me your bag." "I what?" Ivy said, startled. He grabbed her shoulder roughly, tugging at her shirt and exposing her chest. Ivy gasped and stumbled backward. Brian flinched. "Detective," Nathan turned to him sharply. "Say something, Keller." Brian looked down. "Nothing." That night, Aubrey sat at her desk and wrote everything down. Every word, every movement, every humiliation. Then a text from Jenny arrived, a link to a women's rights group. Aubrey clicked it, her finger trembling, The next morning, she wore a simple gray coat and tied her hair back tightly. Her eyes, however, gleamed with resolve. She met Jenny at their usual cafe before heading to the precinct. "Are you sure about this?" Jenny asked. "I wrote the report. I'm submitting it today. Then I'm with you. Always." At the precinct, the receptionist barely looked up. "What do you need?" "I want to file a complaint." "Officer Nathan Ward." The woman hesitated before vanishing through a door. Minutes later, Nathan emerged. "Aubrey," he said, with a mocking grin. "Filing a complaint? That's bold. I have every right. And I'm part of this system," he sneered. "You think it'll listen to you?" "I'll go beyond the system if I have to," she said. That night, Aubrey cried into her husband Michael's shoulder. "He threatened me." In the station, Michael kissed her forehead. "We'll fight this. He won't win." The following days were a blur of calls and research. Michael searched forums and news archives for similar stories. Eventually, he found one, written by a young woman named Ellie, that he reached out. Ellie hesitated at first, but eventually agreed to meet. "He did it to me too," she whispered over coffee. "Same lines, same eyes." She agreed to testify. Michael then found Caroline, a supermarket cashier who had been assaulted outside her store by Nathan. "He tore my blouse open," she cried, "and I was too afraid to report it." She also agreed. Meanwhile, Brian was haunted by guilt. At home, he couldn't sleep. At work, he avoided Nathan's eyes. One morning, he confided in Sergeant Roland, an old-timer. "Do the right thing, Keller," Roland said, "or you're just as guilty." Brian reached out to the women's group anonymously. "I'll testify," he said. "I've seen everything." When Aubrey heard the news, she wept. "We're not alone." Rose, a legal advocate, arranged a formal meeting. Aubrey, Ellie, Caroline, and Clara, another victim, shared their stories. Pablo, the attorney, carefully documented every detail. "This isn't one case," he said. "It's a pattern, and we have the strength to expose it." Soon, the media got wind. A local journalist published an anonymous expose. Nathan, reading the article in the break room, turned red with rage. "They dare publish this trash?" Brian said nothing, but inside, he felt peace for the first time in weeks. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was full. Aubrey walked in, Michael beside her, hand in hand. The judge read the charges: abuse of power, unlawful search, sexual misconduct. Ellie testified first, then Caroline, then Clara, then Brian. "I was a coward," he said, "but no more. I saw what he did." Nathan's attorney tried to discredit him. "I have no vendetta," Brian said, "only a conscience." Rose submitted internal complaints that had been dismissed in the past. Pablo concluded, "This is not about one woman. It's about power unchecked." But that ends today. The judge took his time. Finally, he delivered the verdict. Officer Nathan Ward is hereby sentenced to 5 years in prison and barred permanently from serving in law enforcement. Aubrey's knees buckled. Michael caught her. Across the room, Ellie wept. Caroline nodded. Clara smiled. Outside the courthouse, Brian approached Aubrey. "I'm sorry I didn't act sooner." She looked at him and said, "You did now. And that matters." As the sun set, Aubrey stood beside Michael. "We won," she whispered. Michael smiled. "No, love. You won. For all of them."